The courtroom was supposed to be a place of order, discipline, and law. People came here seeking justice, believing that within these four walls truth always prevailed. But on this day, justice was about to be mocked, order shattered, and the thin line between law and crime blurred by men who were never what they pretended to be. The atmosphere was tense. Neighbors sat in the gallery, whispering among themselves, waiting for the judge to rule on yet another ridiculous fine the so-called homeowners association had imposed. At the center of it all stood Jack's family, a proud Navy SEAL veteran, his wife, and his community friends. They were tired, humiliated, and angry, but still holding their ground. Then it happened. One of the so-called HOA cops, men in fake uniforms with cheap badges and an arrogance that reeked of fraud, leaned across the bench. His face twisted with authority he didn't really have. Without warning, his hand shot out, and smack! The sound echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. Jack's wife's face snapped to the side, her eyes wide with shock as the sting of the slap painted her cheek red. The entire room froze. For a second, silence ruled. Not a breath, not a cough, not a whisper. Only the ringing echo of that slap. The judge's gavel banged furiously. "Order! Order in the court!" But order was already gone. Gasps filled the gallery. Someone muttered, "Did he just hit her?" Another neighbor stood, pointing furiously, but sat down again when one of the fake cops reached for his baton. Fear spread through the room like wildfire. Jack's hands clenched into fists. His knuckles whitened as his entire body stiffened. His Navy SEAL training told him to control his emotions, to wait for the right moment. But inside, a storm was building. He wasn't just a veteran anymore, he was a husband watching the woman he loved being humiliated in front of strangers. The fake cop smirked, enjoying the silence he had created. He adjusted his belt as if daring anyone to challenge him. His partner, another fraud in a cheap uniform, scanned the room with cold eyes, his hand resting casually on his fake badge. Jack's wife touched her cheek, her eyes glistening with both pain and anger. She whispered softly, "Jack." Her voice was shaky but carried a message only he understood, "Do something." Jack inhaled slowly. Memories of war zones flickered in his mind, desert ambushes, dark alleys in hostile cities, missions where hesitation meant death. He had always been calm under fire. But now, this wasn't about a mission. This was about family. The judge shouted again, his voice breaking with frustration. "These men will be removed." Bailiff. But the bailiff himself looked uncertain, almost afraid of these fake cops who had been terrorizing the community for months. They acted like they owned the court, like they owned the town, like they owned everyone. The neighbors whispered, some pulling out phones, some too scared to record. One older man leaned forward and whispered to his wife, "Those aren't even real cops. They're frauds." Jack already knew that. He'd been watching, waiting, collecting every detail. Their uniforms didn't fit right. Their holsters were empty. Their movements sloppy. To anyone else, they looked official enough. But to a Navy SEAL, their weaknesses were obvious. The slap wasn't just an act of violence, it was a mistake. The wrong man's wife had been struck. Jack's jaw tightened. His eyes locked on the fake cop, and in that moment, the veteran inside him woke up. The courtroom wasn't just a courtroom anymore, it was a battlefield. He didn't move yet. No, Jack was smarter than that. He let the silence stretch, let the fake cop feel confident. But inside, the decision had already been made. He was going to end this, brutally, decisively, and without apology. And as the gallery shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the storm about to break, Jack leaned forward ever so slightly, his voice calm but cold, whispering to himself. "You just picked the wrong family." The stage was set. The sound of that slap still hung in the air, long after the shock had settled into silence. Jack's wife sat stiff, her hand pressed gently against her cheek, her eyes shimmering but unbroken. She had endured humiliation, but her spirit remained intact. And Jack. Jack was no longer the same man who had walked into that courtroom minutes earlier. He was changing. His breathing slowed, steady like the rhythm of waves on the ocean. To anyone watching, he looked calm, too calm. But inside, his blood surged like a raging river. Years of discipline were the only thing keeping him from exploding in that very moment. A Navy SEAL wasn't trained to lash out in anger. He was trained to observe, calculate, and strike with precision when the time was right. And that's exactly what Jack was doing now. His eyes scanned the room. Every detail mattered. The fake cop who had slapped his wife stood smug, shoulders broad, chest puffed out like a predator who believed he had already won. His partner leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed, but Jack noticed the twitch in his fingers, nervous, restless. These men weren't soldiers. They weren't officers. They were imposters who had grown comfortable with fear, with intimidation. Jack tilted his head slightly, listening beyond the gavel strikes and the murmurs of the crowd. He could hear his wife's shallow breathing. He could hear the shuffle of shoes as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And he could hear the faint, cocky laugh of the man who had dared to touch her. Every sound was a trigger. Every sound was a countdown. "Mr. Harper, control yourself," the judge warned, mistaking Jack's steady glare for recklessness. The gavel cracked again, but even the judge's authority was fading. The fake cops weren't respecting him, the bailiff wasn't moving, and fear was choking the air. Jack didn't respond. He didn't even blink. He just let his silence speak louder than words. Inside his mind, muscle memory was already at work. He pictured the angle of his chair. The distance to the fake cop, 6 feet, maybe 7. The man's stance, sloppy, weight uneven, dominant arm exposed. The partner, slightly behind, an easy blindside if needed. Jack could see the fight before it happened. Every movement, every strike, every takedown. He wasn't planning violence. He was preparing justice. His wife looked at him, her eyes pleading but trusting. She knew her husband. She had seen him in uniform, leaving for missions he couldn't talk about, returning with scars he couldn't explain. She knew that stillness in him, that terrifying calm that came before the storm. The fake cop smirked again, pointing at her like she was prey. "You people don't run this place," he barked, voice full of arrogance. The crowd flinched. Some looked away. Others bowed their heads. But Jack didn't move. He just stared, a cold, unflinching gaze that could freeze a man's soul. The fake cop chuckled nervously, shifting his weight, trying to shake off the discomfort. He couldn't understand why this veteran wasn't afraid. Why wasn't he shouting? Why wasn't he trembling like the others? Because Jack wasn't like the others. In his head, the battlefield was already laid out. He could almost feel the weight of the sand in foreign deserts, smell the oil from burning vehicles, hear the whispers of soldiers waiting for the command to strike. It wasn't PTSD. It was preparation. He was wired for moments like this. And now, the enemy had revealed himself. The judge pounded again, his voice desperate. "Enough. This court will have order or I will." But even the judge's words dissolved into the background. Jack's focus had narrowed to a single point, the man who had dared to lay a hand on his wife. Jack leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. His muscles tensed, his body coiled like a spring. His silence was more terrifying than any threat. People in the gallery began to notice it. They whispered nervously, glancing between Jack and the fake cops, sensing something was about to snap. The fake cop sneered, trying to reassert dominance. "What are you looking at, old man? Sit down before I make you." He never finished the sentence. Because in that moment, Jack's decision was sealed. He wasn't going to shout. He wasn't going to warn. He was going to end this. And though his body hadn't moved yet, his mind was already in combat mode. His fury wasn't loud, but it was lethal. Silent, controlled, unstoppable. Jack Harper, the Navy SEAL, had awakened. The fake cop's words were still hanging in the air, arrogant, venomous, dripping with the confidence of a man who thought fear was his shield. "What are you looking at, old man? Sit down before I make you." That was it. Jack didn't wait for the sentence to end. In the military, hesitation could kill you. Here, hesitation meant letting these frauds keep power. And Jack Harper had never been a man who hesitated when the mission was clear. The mission now was simple: protect his wife. End the humiliation. Expose the truth. Jack rose from his seat with the calmness of a man stretching his legs, but the air shifted instantly. People in the gallery leaned forward. The fake cop who had slapped his wife tilted his head, a smirk tugging at his lips, mistaking Jack's movement for weakness. But then Jack's eyes locked onto his. Cold. Precise. Deadly. The kind of stare only a soldier who had seen war could carry. Before the fake cop could react, Jack moved. Fast. Too fast for anyone in the courtroom to register until it was already happening. His left hand shot forward, grabbing the man's wrist, the same wrist that had struck his wife. A twist, a pull, and a sharp crack echoed in the courtroom. The fake cop screamed, his arrogance vanishing in an instant as his arm bent at an unnatural angle. The crowd gasped. Phones flew into the air, recording. Jack didn't stop. He spun the man around, slamming him face first onto the polished courtroom floor. The sound was brutal, final. Blood smeared across the tile as the once smug enforcer howled in pain. "Get off him," the second fake cop barked, pushing off the wall, rushing forward. His movements were clumsy, desperate. Jack was already turning. His body flowed like water, his training guiding every motion. He sidestepped the charge, using the man's own momentum against him. A sharp elbow to the gut knocked the wind out of him. Before the imposter could recover, Jack's boot connected with his knee. Another crack. Another scream. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Some people screamed. Others cheered. The judge pounded his gavel, shouting, "Order! Order!" but his voice was drowned out by the storm unfolding before him. The first fake cop tried to push himself up, his broken arm dangling uselessly. Jack grabbed him by the collar, lifted him with terrifying ease, and slammed him into the wooden bench. The wood cracked under the force, sending splinters flying. "You think you're law?" Jack's voice thundered, low but powerful. "You're nothing but cowards." The second imposter, limping now, tried to reach for his belt. Jack's sharp eyes caught it instantly. He was bluffing, no gun, no taser, nothing but an empty holster. But Jack didn't give him the chance to fake authority again. He closed the distance, delivering a clean, brutal strike to the jaw. The man collapsed like a rag doll, unconscious before he hit the floor. Gasps turned into cheers. People rose to their feet, clapping, shouting, recording. The gallery had just watched two self-proclaimed enforcers dismantled in seconds. Jack stood over them, chest rising steadily, not even out of breath. His wife looked at him with wide eyes, not of fear, but of pride. For the first time that day, she felt safe. The judge slammed his gavel again, sweat on his brow, torn between fear and awe. "Mr. Harper, stand down. This is a court of law." Jack's icy stare snapped to the judge. His voice cut through the noise. "Law? Then uphold it. Because these men aren't officers. They're criminals. And I won't sit by while criminals assault my wife." The gallery roared with agreement. Neighbors shouted in support. "He's right. They've been scamming us for years." Finally, someone stood up to them. The two broken fakes lay groaning on the floor, stripped of their authority, their power shattered in front of the very people they had been terrorizing. Jack straightened his back, eyes sweeping across the room. For the first time, the fear wasn't on the faces of the neighbors, it was on the frauds. And as he stood there, towering over the wreckage he created, one truth became crystal clear. The Navy's SEAL had awakened. And he wasn't finished. The courtroom smelled of fear and blood. The once smug enforcers who had strutted in like kings now lay groaning on the floor, their fake authority shattered with their bones. But Jack wasn't done. Not yet. The first imposter tried to crawl, dragging his broken arm across the floor, his breath ragged and desperate. Jack's boots echoed as he walked toward him, calm and deliberate. Every step made the gallery hold its breath. The man whimpered, "Stay back, stay back." But Jack wasn't the kind of man you could beg into mercy. Not after touching his wife. With one swift motion, Jack grabbed him by the collar, lifted him to his knees, and drove his fist straight into his jaw. The crack of bone silenced the room. Blood sprayed, teeth flew, and the man slumped, unconscious, his face a ruined mess. The crowd erupted in gasps and shouts. Some screamed, but others cheered. People who had been terrorized for months by these fakes suddenly felt something stir inside them, hope. "Take them down, Jack," someone yelled from the back. The second imposter groaned, trying to rise. His jaw already swollen, his knee shattered, but his pride refused to let him stay down. He spat blood on the floor and snarled, "You're finished, old man." Jack turned his head slowly, like a predator spotting prey. He advanced without hesitation. The man swung wildly, a desperate, sloppy punch. Jack ducked effortlessly, grabbed his wrist, and twisted. The man howled. Jack didn't stop there, he yanked the arm down, slamming his elbow across it with precision. Another snap. Echoed. The imposter collapsed, clutching his arm, writhing in agony. The gallery cheered louder this time, their fear transforming into courage. Phones were recording from every angle. The truth was no longer hidden, everyone was seeing the HOA cops exposed for what they were. The judge pounded his gavel, his voice cracking. "Mr. Harper. Stand down. This is enough." But Jack's eyes never left the broken man at his feet. He knelt down, his voice low, calm, and deadly. "You thought you could slap my wife, in front of me? You thought uniforms and cheap badges would protect you?" The man whimpered, his arrogance drowned in pain. Jack stood, grabbed him by the back of the head, and slammed his face into the wooden floor. The crack of his nose breaking echoed like thunder. Blood pooled instantly, dripping across the courtroom tiles. The neighbors gasped again, but this time there was no fear in their eyes. Only justice. Only satisfaction. Jack straightened, towering over the wreckage. Both fakes lay battered, their faces ruined, their bodies broken. The same men who had strutted into the court with arrogance now looked like crushed dolls. The judge slammed his gavel again, but no one was listening anymore. The gallery had turned into a riot of voices. "They're frauds!" "Jack's right. They've been scamming us all along." Even the bailiff, who had once stood frozen with uncertainty, now stepped forward. He looked at Jack, then at the wrecked imposters, then back at the judge. His voice trembled, but there was conviction in it. "Your Honor, I don't think these men are officers at all." The judge froze, his face pale. His eyes darted to the fake badges, to the cheap uniforms, to the pathetic groans of the imposters now stripped of their confidence. He swallowed hard. For the first time, he realized Jack wasn't the criminal here. He was the only one standing for justice. Jack turned, his gaze sweeping across the room. His wife's eyes met his, filled with pride and relief. She knew the man she married wasn't just a soldier, he was a shield. A wall no one could break. The Navy SEAL had dismantled the frauds in minutes. Their faces were broken, their lies shattered, and their reign of fear ended right there, in front of the community they had terrorized. And yet, Jack's calm expression told everyone one thing. This wasn't over. Because exposing the fakes was only the beginning. The courtroom floor was painted with blood, the echo of bone cracks still fresh in everyone's ears. The two fake HOA cops lay broken, their bodies twitching with pain, their faces barely recognizable. The people who had once cowered under their threats now stood tall, holding their phones high, recording every second. The judge sat frozen, his gavel limp in his hand. The official order of his courtroom had crumbled, replaced by something rawer, more powerful, the truth. Jack stood in the center, his chest steady, his eyes cold. He hadn't come here looking for a fight, but the fight had found him, and now it was over. Or at least, it looked over. But Jack knew better. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. "Look at them," Jack's voice thundered through the chamber, low and commanding. "You call these men officers? You call this justice?" He bent down, yanking one of the fake badges from the unconscious imposter's chest. He held it high, turning it so the crowd could see. Under the bright lights, it gleamed, cheap metal, flimsy engraving, the kind of thing anyone could order online. "This," Jack said, his voice cutting like a blade, "isn't real." A wave of murmurs swept the gallery. Neighbors leaned forward, squinting, gasping, realizing what they'd been blind to for so long. Jack tossed the badge onto the floor. It clattered loudly, hollow and pathetic. "They've been lying to you. Lying to all of us. Fake uniforms. Fake authority. Fake HOA fines. They've stolen your money, your peace, and your dignity. And you let them, because you were afraid." The gallery erupted in a chorus of outrage. "He's right. They fined me $500 for a mailbox. They threatened to tow my car last week." Anger that had been simmering for months, maybe years, now boiled over. The fear that had kept people silent was gone. The bailiff, who had been trembling moments before, finally stepped forward. His hand shook as he bent down and picked up another badge from the second imposter's chest. He examined it closely, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this isn't government-issued. These aren't law enforcement officers. They're frauds." The judge's face paled. His eyes darted nervously between Jack, the bailiff, and the gallery. He slammed his gavel weakly. This court will recess until..." No, Jack's voice cut him off like a blade. He took a step forward, pointing directly at the judge. "You let this happen. You let these men walk into your courtroom, dressed like officers, and assault innocent people. You let them terrorize this community under your watch. Either you were blind, or you were complicit." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The judge's hand froze on the gavel, sweat dripping down his forehead. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. Jack turned back to the gallery, his voice rising. "These men don't represent the law. They represent greed. A fake HOA, nothing more than criminals in costumes. And today, their power ends." The room thundered with cheers. Neighbors stood up, some clapping, some shouting in agreement. The once silent, cowed community now roared with unity. The two imposters groaned, their broken bodies sprawled on the floor. Their reign of fear was shattered, not just by Jack's fists, but by the truth finally dragged into the light. Jack helped his wife to her feet, his touch gentle against the bruise on her cheek. She looked at him, pride glowing in her eyes, and whispered, "You did it. You showed them." Jack shook his head slightly, his voice calm but resolute. "No. We showed them. Fear doesn't own us anymore." The gallery erupted again, louder this time, no longer a courtroom audience but a community reclaiming its voice. And as Jack stood tall, surrounded by broken frauds and awakened neighbors, one truth burned brighter than ever. The fake HOA was exposed. And justice had only just begun. The roar of the gallery still shook the walls when the sound of boots echoed down the hallway. Heavy, synchronized, unmistakable. Real officers. The courtroom doors burst open, and 6 uniformed police stormed in, their weapons drawn, their presence commanding. "Everyone, back! Step away from the suspects," one of them barked. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some scrambled back into their seats, others ducked, unsure if more violence was about to erupt. But Jack didn't move. He stood tall in the center of the chaos, his wife at his side, the 2 broken imposters sprawled at his feet like discarded trash. The lead officer's eyes darted across the scene, blood on the floor, two battered men in fake uniforms, terrified neighbors holding up their phones. Then his gaze locked on Jack. "You!" he shouted. "Hands where I can see them." Slowly, deliberately, Jack raised his hands. His calmness contrasted with the tension buzzing in the air. "Before you make a mistake," he said, his voice steady, "you need to know what happened here." One of the injured impostors groaned, blood spilling from his broken nose. He raised a trembling finger toward Jack. He attacked us. He's dangerous." The gallery exploded in protest. "They're lying. They're not real cops. They've been scamming us for months." The officers froze, their eyes flicking between the imposters and the angry, unified crowd. Jack lowered his voice, cold and precise, the way he used to debrief his SEAL team after missions. "These men are not officers. Their badges are fake. Their authority is fake. They assaulted my wife in this courtroom, in front of a judge, in front of all of you." The bailiff stepped forward quickly, holding out the flimsy badge he'd examined earlier. His voice carried weight now, steadier than before. "He's right. These aren't government-issued. These men are police. They've been running a scam under the guise of a homeowners association." The lead officer snatched the badge, studying it. His jaw tightened. "Cheap junk," he muttered. He turned back to the imposters. "Where did you get these?" The imposters stammered, their bravado long gone. We were just..." Jack cut them off, his tone sharp as a blade. "You were just stealing. Just terrorizing. Just abusing your neighbors for profit. And now, you're done." The crowd roared in agreement. Phones stayed up, recording every second. The lead officer finally nodded, his decision made. He pointed at the two broken imposters. "Cuff them. Now." Real cuffs clinked as the officers dragged the imposters off the floor, ignoring their whimpers of pain. For the first time, the fake HOA enforcers felt what true authority looked like. The gallery erupted in cheers, louder than ever. People hugged each other, their relief palpable. Some even cried, realizing the nightmare that had haunted their neighborhood was finally being dismantled in front of their eyes. But even in the celebration, Jack's face remained serious. He knew better than anyone, when you cut the head off a snake, another could always slither out. As the officers marched the imposters out, one of them paused, glancing at Jack. "You're trained," he said quietly. "You don't move like a civilian." Jack's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't answer right away, just stared back with that calm, unflinching gaze. "Finally," he said, "I'm someone who knows how to deal with bullies." The officer studied him for a moment longer, then gave a small nod of respect. The judge, pale and shaken, tried to regain control, hammering his gavel. "Order! This hearing is adjourned until further notice." But no one cared. The neighbors were too busy cheering Jack, chanting his name, chanting for justice. For the first time in years, the community wasn't living in fear, it was standing tall. Jack turned to his wife, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "It's not over," he murmured. "We exposed the muscle. Now we need to find who's really behind this HOA." Her eyes widened, but she nodded. She knew him well enough to recognize that look. Jack wasn't done. Not even close. And somewhere in the shadows of power, the real masterminds of the fake HOA had just felt their empire tremble. The courtroom still buzzed with cheers as the fake cops were dragged away in real cuffs. Neighbors hugged, voices rose, and for the first time in years, hope bloomed in their eyes. But Jack wasn't celebrating. His instincts screamed at him. This wasn't finished. Soldiers like those imposters were never the top of the food chain. They were pawns, nothing more. Jack's eyes swept the room. He studied the judge, pale and trembling. He studied the gallery, their faces lit with relief. But his attention landed on one man, quiet, seated near the back, calm when everyone else roared. He hadn't cheered. He hadn't moved. He hadn't even flinched when Jack broke bones in front of him. Jack knew that kind of composure. It wasn't fearlessness, it was calculation. The man adjusted his expensive tie, whispering something into his phone before standing. He moved toward the exit like a shadow slipping out of the room. Jack's hand tightened into a fist. "There you are. Stay here," he told his wife quietly. Without waiting for a reply, he cut through the crowd and slipped out the double doors. The hallway was quieter, the echo of distant boots fading as the impostors were hauled away. Jack spotted the man striding quickly toward the courthouse steps. Everything about him screamed money and power, tailored suit, polished shoes, arrogance in every movement. "Going somewhere?" Jack's voice thundered down the hall. The man froze, then turned slowly, a smug smile creeping across his face. "Ah. The Navy SEAL." Jack's jaw tightened. "Who are you?" The man stepped closer, his voice smooth, practiced, dripping with confidence. "Names aren't important. But since you've already ruined my little operation, I suppose you deserve the truth. I am the HOA. Jack's eyes narrowed. "You're the one who sent them." The man chuckled. "Sent them? I own them. Those idiots you broke in there? They were hired muscle. Disposable. My real business is much bigger than your little neighborhood." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Property control. Land seizures. Fines, foreclosures, it's a gold mine. And I built it all." Jack didn't blink. "You built it on fear." The man's smile widened. "Fear works. People pay faster when they're scared. And those fake uniforms? Genius, aren't they? For pennies, I created an army that could bully homeowners into obedience. No courts, no oversight, no hassle. Just pure profit." Jack's voice dropped, cold and sharp. "You put your hands on my wife." The man raised an eyebrow, unbothered. "Collateral damage. Nothing personal. But you? You've made it personal. And trust me, soldier, you don't want to make me your enemy." Jack stepped closer, towering over him. "You already are." The man's eyes glinted with arrogance, but Jack caught the flicker beneath it, the smallest twitch of uncertainty. Footsteps echoed again. Two of the real officers approached, glancing between the suited man and Jack. "Everything all right here?" one asked. The man instantly switched masks, his voice oily and polite. "Officers, thank goodness. This man, he's unstable. He just assaulted my employees in the courtroom. I want him arrested." The officer frowned. "We already confirmed those men were frauds." The man chuckled smoothly, reaching into his jacket and producing a stack of documents. "Frauds? No. Contractors. Hired security. It's all here, in black and white." He handed over the papers with confidence. "Legal. Certified. Signed off." Jack's stomach tightened. He knew the type: paper trails, shell companies, loopholes. The kind of enemy you couldn't break with fists alone. The officer flipped through the documents, confused. This looks legit." The man smirked at Jack. "See? You can punch a soldier. You can't punch paperwork. That's why I win." Jack's rage burned, but he forced himself calm. The battlefield had shifted. This wasn't about bones anymore, it was about brains. He leaned in close, his voice low enough for only the man to hear. "You're right. I can't punch paperwork. But I can burn your empire to the ground. And when I'm done, you'll wish all I did was break your face." For the first time, the man's smile faltered. Jack stepped back, his eyes locked on him like a predator marking prey. This war wasn't over, it had only just begun. The suited man's smirk lingered like poison in the air, but Jack wasn't rattled. He'd seen warlords, cartel bosses, and corrupt politicians, all of them thought paper shields and money made them untouchable. But Jack knew better. Empires always fell. They just needed the right pressure point. That night, Jack sat at his kitchen table, a thick folder spread open in front of him. His wife brewed coffee, her cheeks still bruised from the slap she'd taken, but her eyes burned with determination. "You can't take this man head on," she warned. "He has lawyers, money, influence. You said it yourself, he hides behind paperwork." Jack leaned forward, scanning documents neighbors had slipped him after court. HOA fines, foreclosure notices, bank statements, all with the same signature. Everyone thinks paperwork is a shield. But it's also a trail. And trails can be followed. His wife placed a hand on his. "So, what's the plan?" Jack's eyes hardened. "Expose him. Break his empire with truth." By morning, Jack had turned his house into a command post. The same precision he once used to plan missions overseas now mapped every fraudulent transaction, every fake foreclosure, every forged document the mastermind had signed. Word spread fast. Neighbors showed up, carrying boxes of old letters, eviction threats, payment receipts. The living room piled high with evidence of years of corruption. One elderly woman clutched Jack's hand. "They nearly took my home. Said I owed thousands in fees I never agreed to. I was too scared to fight." Jack squeezed her hand firmly. "Not anymore. You're not alone. The people who had been victims yesterday were soldiers today." Jack was giving them back their courage. 2 days later, Jack walked into a local news station, a flash drive in hand. The producer, skeptical at first, raised an eyebrow as Jack laid out the story: fake cops, fake HOA, fake fines. And then, the kicker, videos of the courtroom brawl, showing Jack breaking the imposters while neighbors shouted the truth. "You're saying this whole association is a fraud?" the producer asked. "I'm saying it's an organized criminal enterprise," Jack replied. "And I have the evidence to prove it." By the evening broadcast, the story had exploded across TV and social media. Fake HOA scandal uncovered, community terrorized by fraudulent enforcement blared across the screen. Clips of Jack's fight went viral, painting him not as a vigilante, but as a protector. The mastermind's empire began to crack. Calls flooded the courthouse. Reporters swarmed his office. Investigators opened files. And neighbors across the state began to question their own HOAs. Furious, the mastermind confronted Jack outside his home, pulling up in a black SUV. His polished composure was cracking. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "You embarrass me on national television, but you don't understand how deep this runs. I own the banks. I own the courts. You can't touch me." Jack stepped forward, unflinching. "I don't need to touch you. I just need to shine a light. And roaches don't survive in the light." The mastermind's jaw tightened, his confidence eroding. For the first time, he looked like prey. Jack's wife stepped onto the porch, her voice steady. "Leave. Or the next time you come here, it won't be cameras you'll face. It'll be handcuffs." The man's eyes darted between them, then to the neighbors gathering on lawns with phones recording. His empire of fear was collapsing, piece by piece, and there was nothing his money could buy to stop it. He slammed the SUV door and sped away, but Jack knew what that meant. This wasn't over. It was war. And Jack Harper never lost a war. The morning sun rose over the neighborhood, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel heavy. No fake patrol cars lurking at corners. No bogus violation notices stuffed into mailboxes. No menacing officers pounding on doors. The community was quiet. Peaceful. But Jack knew the storm wasn't over yet. The mastermind was wounded, humiliated, but not gone. Men like him never walked away quietly. It came sooner than expected. 3 nights later, black SUVs rolled into the neighborhood under cover of darkness. The mastermind himself stepped out, flanked by a handful of hired thugs. His expensive suit was gone, now he wore black tactical gear, desperate to reclaim control by force. "This neighborhood belongs to me," he shouted, his voice echoing through the streets. "Anyone who resists will regret it." But the fear he relied on was gone. Lights flicked on in every house. Doors opened. Neighbors poured into the street, not cowering, but standing tall. Phones out. Cameras rolling. And at the center of them all stood Jack Harper. Calm. Steady. Deadly. "You're finished," Jack said, his voice carrying through the crowd. "No uniforms. No badges. No lies to hide behind. Just you and me." The mastermind sneered, signaling his men forward. But Jack didn't move. He knew the thugs weren't soldiers, they were mercenaries. Paid muscle. And mercenaries only fought for money. "Think carefully," Jack called out to them, his tone sharp. "You're fighting for a paycheck. I'm fighting for my wife, my home, my community. Who do you think walks away tonight?" The thugs hesitated. Some lowered their weapons. And one by one, they backed off, leaving the mastermind standing alone in the street. Rage twisted across his face. "Traitors! All of you!" He lunged at Jack, wild and desperate. But Jack was ready. The fight was short. Brutal. Efficient. A block, a strike, a takedown, Jack moved with the precision of years of combat experience. Within seconds, the mastermind was flat on the asphalt, Jack's boot pressing down on his chest. "You thought you could buy power," Jack said coldly. "But power belongs to the people. And they've taken it back." The neighbors erupted in cheers, their voices rising like thunder. The mastermind's empire of fear was gone, crushed under the weight of truth and unity. When the real police arrived minutes later, they found the mastermind beaten, restrained, and surrounded by an entire neighborhood ready to testify. The investigation that followed was swift and merciless. Paper trails Jack uncovered led to offshore accounts, fraudulent foreclosures, and shell companies tied directly to the mastermind. His empire collapsed overnight. Properties were returned. Bank accounts were seized. And the man who once strutted in arrogance was left in chains, awaiting trial. Weeks later, the neighborhood gathered in the park. Kids played freely, laughter filling the air instead of the fear that once haunted the streets. Neighbors set up grills, shared food, hugged each other like family. Jack stood with his wife at his side, her cheek healed but her spirit burning stronger than ever. The people cheered for him, called him a hero, but he shook his head. "This wasn't just me," Jack told them, his voice steady. "I threw some punches, sure. But you, the community, you stood up. You refused to be afraid anymore. That's what ended this. That's what real strength looks like." The crowd cheered louder, chanting his name, chanting freedom. Jack's wife leaned into him, whispering, "So what now? No more battles?" Jack gave a small, wry smile. "There's always another battle. But tonight, we celebrate." For the first time in years, Jack Harper allowed himself to relax. Not as a soldier. Not as a warrior. But as a husband, a neighbor, a protector of the people who finally had their lives back. And as the night sky lit up with fireworks, one truth remained clear. The fake HOA was dead. The community was free. And justice had won.